everybody, it's Drybear. We covered a video going over Thunder Cage and how to maximize its electric passive and focus on the mobbing aspect of Thunder Cage. But there was also some feedback on that video about people that liked using the Thunder Cage as their primary weapon. They want to not only trigger the AoE for exploding on mobs, but they also want to use it for bossing because they generally just like the weapon. And fair enough, I'm going to talk today about the crit damage build or crit percent build for crit-based SMGs, of which there are two. And we've also gone over the rapid fire or the fast firing SMGs as well in a separate video. So if you're looking for the other SMGs outside of Python that you'd like to max out for fast firing, we've gone over that as a weighting difference as well. But today I want to talk about the potential for crit SMG builds that focus on crit damage and crit percent and getting as much crit value out of that as you can. And realistically, there's only two SMGs that you can run this properly on, and that's going to be Thunder Cage and Firefly. Both of them have the stats required to be able to scale well off of this build. Now, if you run Thunder Cage as a hybrid weapon, which means you're focusing on not only upfront damage and single target damage, but also AoE damage, you're going to be losing out on some of the potential that the ultimate passive gives you in being able to mob and destroy mobs with big explosions. But it does have enough base stats for you to do the crit value from that as well, which means the stat weighting changes a little bit from what we were looking at for the rapid fire SMGs and also for the Thunder Cage ultimate passive focused build. In this, you still want weak point, firearm attack, and fire rate when possible. Keep in mind that there are 4 stats in the First Descendant that are what I would call one-to-one or global scalars. And what this means is that the full value of the stat that you're applying to the weapon gets directly applied to the end result because of where it sits in the equation. Those 4 stats are weak point damage, firearm attack or explosive attack, as well as fire rate, and the last one is shell capacity for shotguns. Those values get applied one-to-one to the weapon and the final damage number and the DPS overall because where they sit in the equation. Every other stat that you apply to a weapon, reload, crit damage, crit percent, rounds per magazine, things like that, those will change based on the weapon and are quite conditional based on what the equation is for that weapon itself. And in the case of crit SMGs, you do want to prioritize crit damage more than anything, especially on the Thunder Cage, which has a very nice high base crit damage scalar. But because of the general fire rate and the overall rapidness of an SMG, you still get excellent overall DPS value by adding more mags into the magazine. Unless you plan to fire a single clip of Thunder Cage and then go sit in the corner and pick flowers for the next 10 minutes, the time to empty the magazine as well as the reload time before you can start firing again is very important for the overall DPS measure for a weapon. It's how long you have uptime on damage versus how long you're spending standing still reloading and doing nothing, and how long it takes before those magazines are empty and you have no ammo left. All of that is part of the overall equation for the weapon. So I would say crit damage, then rounds, then crit percent, and then reload for these weapons, and this is the overall that we're going to look for here. The core modules that I would look for on a crit SMG are going to be rifling, reinforcement, and action and reaction. These are your core. These are some of the best modules in the entire game. They range in value depending on the module itself and the weapon itself, but overall are still incredibly good. And also so is have aiming. It's one of the best modules. It works on almost every weapon, except for maybe explosives and launchers that don't scale as well with some of that stat just based on how they function. And weak point side is going to be great as well. But instead of going for increased fire rate, magazine size, and reload like we would with the rapid SMGs, and instead of going for a pure elemental electric setup like we would when we're trying to maximize the passive effect of the Thunder Cage, in this case, we are going to want to maximize crit damage and pick up as much crit percent as we possibly can. Every point of crit, like, you know, the economy of crit damage to crit percent is about 3x. You get about 3 times more crit damage for each slot and opportunity cost you pay than you do for crit chance, and that's because it's just a bigger number. So in general, I'm going to recommend reload insight, better concentration, better insight, and concentration priority. This gives you a whole bunch of the crit damage coming off of this and crit chance from better insight, as well as crit damage from better concentration and concentration priority. And on reload insight, we're just kind of dealing with the negative reload that you get from concentration priority, which is a massive 120% crit damage, but a minus 30% reload. That 30% reload is quite a big deal, and we want to make sure we try to nullify that as best we can. And keep in mind that plus minus reload time is an additive feature, which means that if you subtract 30% reload time and then you add 30% reload time, it cancels out and equals 0. So reload insight doesn't get us all the way there, but it does also include some crit, which is super nice. And I've decided I'm just going to mention this in every single build video because it is important. You can't stack any module that shares the same group together. So if you look at a module, if you see at the bottom here, it says special mod, that is the module's grouping. That's the group that it belongs to. Once I have added a module from that group, I am unable to add any other mod that belongs to that same group. So in the case of things like firearm attack, for example, it belongs to the ATK group, so I can add firearm attack with sharpshooter, but if I want to add pinpoint shot or antimatter round, it won't be able to add it because it belongs to the same group. However, if some of the base blues don't include that, so for example, like fire and rifling reinforcement, this is a firearm attack scaler, but it doesn't belong to the same group, so you can stack those, and that's why in the build guide we go over having a blue and a purple. As long as they don't belong to the same group, we can still stack them together. The other thing that you need to know about making your weapon better is you will need to use a max capacity up on the weapon using an energy activator. This will increase the max capacity of the weapon, and then making the weapon even more specialized goes along the line of assigning module socket type. You use crystallization catalyst for this, you select a socket, and you specify the type for that, cerulean or xantic or whatever, and then when you have a module in that slot that matches the type that you've set it for, it will reduce the capacity of it by 50%. If it doesn't match, it will increase the capacity. So when you see a full build like this, where you have green numbers and red numbers and whatever, and you have a full 5x5 row of modules, it means that the weapon has been fully activated and also has been formed or used catalysts on it to make it better and better to modify that. So when you first get the weapon, if you're just trying to build it right away, upgrading all your modules, they're not all going to fit on the weapon until you specialize more into that weapon overall. On the far left side of the screen, I include a benchmarking for all of the modules listed here, and that shows the priority order that you want to go in enhancing those modules, which makes them more expensive in capacity, and also in what order you want to catalyze them in the making them cheaper and keeping them on board is going to be more valuable for you. Keep in mind that the core doesn't include a special mod. There are two special mods that I would highly recommend for a crit SMG build, and that's going to be Real Life Fighter or Sweeping Squad. The difference here is how much you want to try and fiend after and slave after going for weak point hits. Weak point is still one of the best, if not the best stat in the entire game, but in some cases, depending on your accuracy, your preference in playstyle, or the enemy you're facing, can actually lose a lot of efficacy because you're not getting good uptime on weak point hits. If you can get good weak point hits with a crit SMG, Real Life Fighter is going to be your best bet. It is insanely strong and very good. The way Real Life Fighter works is that when you hit a weak point, you stack it. When you miss a weak point, you lose stacks. With an SMG, you're going to build a bunch of stacks quickly, but if you miss the weak point, you'll lose those stacks quickly, and that can lose value. However, the other option is Sweeping Squad. This one gives you firearm attack every time you get a kill, and I've confirmed by testing myself that it does refresh the duration of the entire stack, stacking up to 3 times, which means you can keep Sweeping Squad active as long as there are enemies to kill. You can keep it active 100% of the time. It's full uptime as long as you have ads to kill, whereas Real Life Fighter is not going to be that full uptime there. However, with a rapid SMG or even a crit SMG, you're still going to get crazy value out of Real Life Fighter in the moment that you need it, and that's why it's benchmarked so much higher, but could have less there. So you can either go for the safer option with Sweeping Squad, or the more aggressive option where you have to hit weak points with Real Life Fighter. Then the others kind of fall into place based on the value you get from them. Outside of this core here, I can also recommend Rapid Fire Insight, Insight Focus, and Insight Support Ammo. The big thing here is you're trying to add in more firearm critical hit rate. If you decide to run this Insight Focus, you're gonna have to move these around a little bit. Insight Support is also very good. Adding more rounds to the magazine is a great DPS increase for an SMG based on its stat profile. And Rapid Fire Insight is also very good because you get fire rate. Remember that fire rate is one of the 4 king global stats that apply 1-to-1 with no reductions, which means it's incredibly, incredibly good. The only asterisk we include there is that fire rate can lead to running out of ammo, which obviously means you have 0 DPS, but if you can manage that, fire rate is an exceptionally strong stat that will be one of the best stats for almost any weapon in the entire game. Now, we want to also include in the conditional, if you're not doing a focused elemental weapon like the pure Thunder Cage focused on the passive, if you're going to do a crit SMG variant hybrid Thunder Cage, in this case, this allows you to play through the elemental style. So the way this works is you leave anywhere from 3 to 1 slots uncatalyzed, which means they're not specified. You don't specify the slot type for it overall. You leave it the way it is, and then you slot in electric enhancement and electric gun barrel, chill enhancement and refrigerant gun barrel, toxic enhancement, toxic gun barrel, fire enhancement, and the fire gun barrel version. And you do that to face off against a specific target that you know is weak to that element, which can be a serious DPS increase, especially if you end up rolling a passive stat on that, like chill attack, fire attack, electric attack, that sort of thing. If they're weak to the element and you run the gun barrel that scales it, it can be a nice increase. And even just running the enhancement itself, these scale up to 30% firearm attack bonus as elemental, which further gets upgraded by things like weak point and also the elemental weakness as well. However, the challenge with this is that if you go up against an enemy that doesn't have that element, you have to constantly swap out your modules. So it's more of like an advanced tactic to get just the most value on that target. So if you don't want to go with the elemental swapping and leave it, you could go with a full catalyst on either one of these SMGs. And in that case, I would run like real life fighter and rapid fire insight in the last 2 slots. And then you've got a very well-made crit SMG that's just going to do big upfront damage and doesn't have as much of a focus on the element overall. Now, let me show you what I mean by the real life fire module. And this is the one where if we just have it just basically equipped here, this one is upon successfully attacking the weak point, you stack up firearm attack, which is one of your best stats. But if you miss, it loses 2 stacks. And with these fast firing weapons, you can very quickly stack up to 10 stacks, like very, very fast. You can see the stack number going up. But if you're not careful, you can very easily lose those attacks as well. And on some enemies that have small weak points, you can just go up stacks, drop stacks. And even in some Colossus battles, you end up getting not as much value out of it as well. And especially when they start doing these conditionals where they start wiggling and moving, it can make a really big difference. So I would say you really want to keep in mind that the value that you get from real life fighter is really strong, but I can't stress enough how much of it is a personal choice on whether you want to go for that value and get that crazy high of trying to get that burst damage versus going through something like sweeping squad, which you can keep up almost all the time and have that extra bonus there. The upside is not as high, but the risk is far lower as well. And I should also mention that just in general, even as a crit SMG, the Thunder Cage outperforms the Firefly by a decent margin. So if you're going to run a crit SMG, I recommend just getting the Thunder Cage anyway, but the profile for the stats does apply to Firefly. If you like that weapon, you want to run it, you want to work with it, I would run it as a crit SMG rather than a rapid SMG. And that's the setup for crit SMGs in the First Descendant. Let me know what weapon or weapon type we should cover next down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.